You're exhausted. You've been traveling for 3 days, your pack ponies are tired, and you can finally see the inn ahead. Relief washes over you as you imagine a hot meal, a bed, maybe some decent ale. But here's what you don't know yet. The moment you walk through those gates, you're entering a place where that quiet stranger in the corner is cataloging every word you say about your cargo. Where the innkeeper might be taking a percentage from the highwaymen who'll ambush you tomorrow. Where the urine you're about to produce in that barrel doesn't belong to you anymore. It's property of the local guild, and they'll sell it to tanners and clothmakers for a tidy profit. Welcome to the Medieval Inn. Not the cozy fantasy tavern from movies, the real thing. Let me show you what actually happened when medieval travelers needed a place to sleep. Medieval inns weren't always everywhere. They exploded in number during the later medieval period when something fundamental changed in European commerce. The wool and cloth trade went into overdrive. Suddenly, relatively wealthy merchants were crisscrossing the continent, hauling goods from production centers to markets, from ports to inland cities. These weren't peasants making a once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage. These were professional traders carrying valuable cargo, making regular routes, generating serious money. And they needed infrastructure. Without modern roads or vehicles, everything moved at the speed of foot or hoof. A journey that takes 3 hours by car today could take 3 weeks on horseback. Merchants needed places to stop, not just for themselves, but for their animals and their goods. That demand created a business opportunity that savvy entrepreneurs seized immediately. Small towns might have one inn. Market towns, busier and more prosperous, might have 2 or 3. But provincial capitals? 10 to 15 inns competing for business. Think about what that tells you. In cities that might have only a few thousand residents total, having 15 inns means this was serious business. These weren't occasional rest stops. They were essential infrastructure, as important to medieval commerce as shipping ports or highways. But inns weren't just places to sleep. They became social centers, information exchanges, business hubs, and yes, centers of conspiracy and crime. Everything that mattered in a medieval town eventually passed through the local inn. Everyone who was anyone either owned an inn, worked at one, or spent significant time drinking at one. The inn was where you learned news from distant places, where you made deals, where you heard rumors, and where you plotted against your enemies. Picture your arrival. You're saddle sore, dusty from the road, leading 3 pack ponies loaded with wool or cloth or whatever you're hauling. The inn's gates stand open ahead. They stay open all day, welcoming travelers, showing that this is a place of business. But notice those gates. Heavy wood, iron reinforcements, built to close and lock. Remember that detail. It'll matter later. You lead your animals through into a central courtyard. This layout wasn't accidental. It copied the design of Roman villas, which themselves copied Persian caravanserai, which copied structures going back thousands of years. An interior courtyard with rooms around the outside creates a threshold, a boundary between the dangerous outside world and the relatively safe interior. It also creates a cage, but we'll get to that. A servant approaches. They called them porters sometimes. His job is to assess you quickly. Are you wealthy? Dangerous? Trustworthy? How much can we charge you? He asks your business. You tell him you need rooms for the night and stabling for 3 ponies. He quotes you a price. Now here's something interesting. You might expect haggling, medieval marketplace-style negotiation over the fee, but inn prices were typically fixed by guilds or by law. Everyone paid the same rate for the same service. The medieval economy was full of these fixed prices. People knew what things cost, and that was that. It created stability, but also meant you couldn't talk your way into a discount. The price was the price. Your ponies get led away to the stables by handlers who know their business. These animals are valuable, both as transportation and as commodities themselves. The handlers water them, give them hay, maybe ask if you want to pay extra for hard feed, horse bread, or grain that'll give them more energy. Your cargo gets stored somewhere secure, though how secure probably depends on how much you're paying and how much the innkeeper trusts you. And then you're free to head to the common room, meet the innkeeper, order that ale you've been dreaming about for the past 10 miles. The journey is over. You're safe. Or are you? Let's talk about those gates again, because they're more important than they seem. Yes, they keep danger out, that's obvious. At dusk, or when the town curfew hits, those gates close and lock. Nobody gets in from the outside, which is great when you consider that medieval roads were full of bandits, thieves, and general miscreants who preferred to operate under cover of darkness. But those gates also keep people in. Once they're locked, you're not leaving until morning, until the innkeeper decides to open them again, and that's not just for your safety. It's to make sure you pay your bill. Think about the economics here. You're a merchant. You've paid for a room, for stabling, for food and drink. That's maybe a significant sum, several days' wages for a laborer. What's to stop you from sneaking out in the middle of the night, saddling your horses quietly, and riding off without paying? In a modern world, we have credit cards, identification, legal systems that can track you down. Medieval people had none of that. News traveled at the speed of a galloping horse. If you could get a head start, you could be 3 towns away before anyone knew you'd skipped out on your bill. You could change your name, your appearance slightly, and disappear into the anonymous mass of medieval travelers. Sure, strangers were more noticeable in small communities, but not noticeable enough that a description passed by word of mouth would definitely catch you. So the gates lock. You're spending the night whether you want to or not, and in the morning, the innkeeper collects what's owed before those gates open again. It's not quite a prison, but it's not exactly voluntary either. The architecture creates a power dynamic. The innkeeper controls your exit, which means he controls whether you leave at all. This same design feature that keeps robbers out keeps you trapped inside if things go wrong. If the innkeeper decides you're suspicious, if someone accuses you of something, if there's any kind of dispute, you can't just leave. You're stuck until it gets resolved. Keep that in mind as we talk about some of the other things that happened in these inns. Inns were where everyone mixed in ways that didn't happen anywhere else in medieval society. The social hierarchy was rigid. Peasants stayed in their villages, nobles stayed in their castles, clergy stayed in their monasteries. But inns had everyone. Wealthy merchants traveled, lesser nobles traveled, pilgrims of all social classes traveled, soldiers, messengers, traders, craftsmen, entertainers, everyone ended up in inns eventually. And when people from different places meet, they talk, they share news. In a world without newspapers, without telecommunications, without any kind of mass media, inns were how information spread. A merchant from the coast brings news about ships arriving from the continent. A pilgrim from the north tells you about a new tax the king imposed. A soldier mentions troop movements. Piece by piece, people assembled their understanding of what was happening in the wider world. But information exchange wasn't just casual gossip. Real business happened in inns. Deals were struck. Partnerships formed, contracts negotiated. If you needed to buy wool in bulk, you found someone at an inn. If you needed to hire transportation for goods, you asked around at an inn. If you needed to know which roads were safe and which were crawling with bandits, you listened to the conversations at an inn. This concentration of information and commerce made inns powerful places. It also made them dangerous, because where there's commerce and information, there's opportunity for crime. And where there's a mix of people from different places with no existing loyalties to each other, there's opportunity for conspiracy. Inns were notorious as hotbeds of social unrest. People from different regions would meet, share grievances about taxes or lords or working conditions, and realize they weren't alone in their anger. Revolutionary ideas spread through inns. Uprisings were planned in inn common rooms. Some of the biggest social rebellions in medieval history literally started in inns, where angry people with nothing to lose met other angry people with nothing to lose and decided to do something about it. Authorities knew this. They watched inns carefully, but they couldn't shut them down because they were too economically important. So, inns existed in this strange space, essential to commerce, crucial for travelers, but also breeding grounds for rebellion and crime. The innkeeper had to walk a careful line between encouraging business and avoiding being seen as fostering treason. Let's talk money, because inns made serious money. They were often the wealthiest businesses in any town, earning between £5 and £10 a year. That might not sound like much, but it was significantly more than almost any other local enterprise. A successful innkeeper was rich by medieval standards. This wealth came from multiple revenue streams. You charged for rooms, you charged for stabling, you charged for food and drink, and medieval travelers drank a lot. We'll get to why in a moment. You charged for storage of goods and valuables. You might rent out space for guild meetings or private gatherings. Every service had a price, and those prices added up quickly when you had dozens of travelers every night. Inns had different ownership structures. Some innkeepers owned their establishments outright. It was their private property and business. Others paid rent to whoever owned the building, maybe the local lord, maybe an abbey, maybe a guild. The rent arrangement meant the owner got steady income, while the innkeeper took on the risk and kept the profits after expenses. It was actually a pretty sophisticated business model. Successful innkeepers became powerful community members. Take Richard Kingsmill, who's recorded in historical documents. He started as an innkeeper, but parlayed that success into becoming a town constable, a local magistrate, a town bailiff, and eventually a member of parliament. He diversified into trading fish, cloth, and wine. He owned over 200 sheep. That's not just comfortable, that's wealthy by any standard. And here's something interesting. About 20% of innkeepers were women. In a medieval economy that severely limited women's economic opportunities, innkeeping was one path to genuine financial independence and social power. Female innkeepers had the same authority as male ones, controlled the same resources, and wielded the same influence in their communities. The staff structure varied by inn size. A small establishment might be just the innkeeper and their family doing everything, but a large, busy inn in a provincial capital? That was a complex operation requiring specialists. You needed accountants to keep the books and track what everyone owed. You needed cooks working full-time to feed dozens of people daily. You needed cleaners, maintenance workers, security personnel. The porter who greeted arriving travelers was a specialized position requiring good judgment about people and prices. And then there were the animal handlers. This is something modern people don't think about because our vehicles just park themselves and wait. But horses, ponies, mules, donkeys, these animals need constant care. They need to be watered, fed, checked for injuries or illness, kept calm in an unfamiliar environment with strange animals and people around. An inn with capacity for, say, 30 horses needed multiple full-time handlers working in shifts. These weren't unskilled workers. A spooked horse could kick someone to death, and a sick animal could infect the entire stable. You needed people who knew what they were doing. Privacy was a luxury most medieval people never experienced, and that was especially true at inns. If you were wealthy, you might rent a private room, but most travelers didn't have that option. They slept in common rooms, large spaces with multiple beds, each bed shared by multiple people. You didn't know these people. They were strangers who happened to be traveling the same route at the same time, but you'd crawl into bed with 2 or 3 of them because that's how it worked. The bed might just be a wooden frame with a straw mattress that dozens of other people had used before you. The blankets, if there were blankets, might not have been washed in months. The person snoring next to you might have lice, fleas, or diseases you couldn't identify. If you couldn't afford even a shared bed, you got a pallet in a corner, basically a mat on the floor. And if you couldn't afford that, you slept where you fell, probably near the fireplace in the common room, hoping the warmth would make up for the complete lack of comfort or safety. People didn't undress to sleep. You took off your shoes, your cloak, maybe your hood, but you kept your clothes on, partly for warmth. There was no heating beyond fires, and partly because you might need to get up and run at any moment. Maybe there's a fire. Maybe there's a fight. Maybe someone's trying to rob you. You sleep ready to move. The lack of privacy extended to everything. That conversation you're having about your cargo, your route, your destination, everyone in the common room can hear it. Those coins you're counting to make sure you have enough for tomorrow, everyone can see them. That valuable item you're trying to keep secure, everyone knows you have it. The medieval inn offered shelter, but absolutely no anonymity. Let's talk about toilets, because this is where medieval life gets particularly strange for modern people. You need to use the bathroom. Fine. The inn has facilities for that. But here's the thing. Solid waste and liquid waste are collected separately, and you're expected to know the difference and act accordingly. Solid waste goes into a long drop, basically a deep pit, or into a barrel. This waste gets collected periodically by people called gong farmers. Why collect it? Because human feces is valuable. It's fertilizer. It's a commodity. Someone has a contract to collect it, and they're making money from it. Your urine goes into a separate barrel. And here's where it gets really weird. The moment your urine leaves your body, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to whoever has the rights to collect it, usually a guild. They don't need your permission. You don't get paid for it. It's just automatic. Your bodily waste becomes someone else's property that they'll sell for profit. Why is urine valuable? It had multiple industrial uses. Cloth makers used it to bleach linen, making white fabric genuinely white. Tanners used it in leather production. The ammonia helped process hides. Other industries used it for various chemical processes. Urine was a valuable commodity, and guilds fought over collection rights. Think about how strange this is from a modern perspective. You're producing something inside your body, and the moment it leaves your body, it's someone else's commercial product. You have no say in the matter. You don't even get to claim ownership of your own waste. It's just gone, collected, sold, used to make someone else money. Medieval people accepted this as completely normal. Why wouldn't you collect urine? It's useful, it's there, of course someone's going to monetize it. But imagine trying to explain this system to someone today. Yeah, every time you pee, that pee legally belongs to the local textile guild. They'd think you were insane. Forget about bathing. Inns didn't have bathhouses. Those existed as separate establishments in larger towns and cities, but they weren't part of inn services. If you wanted a proper bath, you went elsewhere and paid separately for it, and most travelers didn't bother. What inns offered were basic washing facilities: a bowl, a jug of water, and maybe a cloth. You poured water into the bowl, wet the cloth, and wiped down your hands and face. Maybe other body parts if you were particularly concerned with hygiene, but this was cold water, no soap worth mentioning, and minimal privacy. You weren't getting clean by modern standards. You were just reducing the visible dirt. This is why everyone smelled terrible. You're traveling for days or weeks. You're sleeping in your clothes. You're not bathing. The water you can drink is limited, and certainly not being wasted on washing your whole body. The best you can do is a quick wipe down of the most obvious dirty bits and hope that's good enough. The wealthy could pay for hot water to be brought to their rooms, heated over fires by servants, poured into a portable wooden tub. This was expensive and time-consuming. Someone had to carry that water from wherever it was sourced, heat it in the kitchen, carry it upstairs to your room, and then carry it back down when you were done. Most travelers couldn't afford this luxury and wouldn't have wanted to spend the time anyway. You're trying to get to your destination, not spend half a day bathing. The inn has cellars. Of course it does. They're built into the foundation, below ground level, maintaining a roughly constant cool temperature, about 5 degrees Celsius, similar to a modern refrigerator. These cellars store the inn's food supplies: root vegetables that'll keep for months, wine barrels, hanging meats, aging on hooks, grain and cereals in barrels or sacks. But cellars have another reputation. They're dark, they're damp, they're full of corners and hiding places, and they're absolutely infested with rats. Every inn had a rat problem. It was just accepted as part of the deal. Sometimes the innkeeper would pay someone to go down and try to reduce the rat population, but it was a losing battle. New rats just moved in to replace the dead ones. For valuable items, EZME, gold, gems, important documents, the inn offered lockbox services. You'd hand your valuables to the innkeeper, he'd write you a receipt, and he'd lock everything in his personal strongbox kept in his private living quarters. You'd pay a fee for this service, and in the morning, you'd get your items back. In theory. Assuming the innkeeper was honest, assuming nobody broke into his quarters overnight, assuming the receipt he gave you was accurate, and he didn't forget about some of your gold. You were trusting this person you'd just met with potentially everything you owned of value. Sometimes that trust was justified, sometimes it wasn't. And then there were the other guests to worry about. Not everyone at an inn was a legitimate traveler. Some people made their living by staying at inns, watching and listening, gathering intelligence about who had money and where they were going. These people weren't obvious criminals. They looked like regular travelers. They sat in corners, smoked pipes, drank quietly, and paid attention to everything. That hooded stranger nursing an ale by himself? He's listening to you brag about the successful sale you just made. He's noting that you mentioned traveling alone tomorrow. He's memorizing your face and the description of your horses. Tomorrow morning, you'll leave the inn and head down the road. And a few hours later, once you're far from any help, that same stranger and his friends will rob you blind. Maybe they'll just take your goods. Maybe they'll kill you to eliminate witnesses. It depends on their mood and how much resistance you put up.